I never planned to fall for her, but the night her aunt whispered, "Don't let go," something in me knew I never would. I remember the first night I really noticed her. It wasn't the kind of moment you expect to stay with you, not at first. It was just a family dinner. Noise everywhere, voices overlapping, the smell of food filling the house. People were moving in and out of the kitchen, carrying trays, pouring drinks, making small talk. Nothing out of the ordinary. And then she walked in. Her aunt. I'd seen her before, of course. She was part of the family picture in my head. Someone I always acknowledged politely. Someone who carried herself with an ease that didn't demand attention but somehow always drew it anyway. But that night, I don't know, something shifted. Maybe it was the way the light from the chandelier caught her hair, or the simple elegance in the way she carried herself across the room, as though she had learned long ago how to make an entrance without trying. I was leaning against the counter when she brushed past me, balancing a plate in one hand. Her fingertips grazed my arm as she murmured, "Excuse me." It should have been nothing, just a casual touch, a passing word. But I felt it. The warmth of her hand lingered like a small spark, spreading through me long after she was gone. I caught myself watching her in fragments after that. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she leaned in to listen to someone. How her laugh wasn't loud, but it had a softness that cut through the noise and made you want to hear it again. She wasn't dressed to stand out, just a simple blouse and jeans. But somehow she seemed more put together than anyone else in the room, and I realized something quietly unsettling. While everyone else in that house blurred together, she was the only one I kept noticing. She moved with the kind of confidence that comes from life experience, from weathering storms most people my age hadn't even seen yet. But behind her composure, I thought I caught glimpses of something else. A flicker of weariness in her eyes, like she carried more than she ever admitted. I remember standing there, pretending to sip from my glass, pretending not to notice how drawn I was becoming to her. Pretending because I knew I had no right to feel anything. She was older. She was her aunt. And yet, when our eyes met for the first time that night, it was brief. So brief that maybe she didn't even notice it. But I did. The moment stretched longer than it should have. There was a steadiness in her gaze, something curious, almost questioning, before she turned away. That look, it stayed with me. Long after the night went on, long after the plates were cleared and the conversations drifted, I kept replaying it in my mind. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning. The start of something I couldn't have predicted, couldn't have planned for. The night I realized that sometimes the people you're not supposed to notice are the very ones who change everything. The house was still alive with noise, laughter spilling from the living room, someone turning up music, kids running around with the kind of energy that never seems to burn out. But I had slipped away. Crowds always made me restless, and I'd found my quiet corner in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a glass of water, letting the sounds fade into the background. That's when she found me, her aunt. She walked in softly, like she was escaping too. There was a plate in her hand, but she set it down on the table without really looking at it. For a moment, she didn't even notice me. She just sighed. One of those tired, unguarded sighs that sound like a confession when no words are spoken. When she finally looked up and saw me, she smiled. Not the polite kind she'd given me earlier, but something smaller, quieter. "Too loud in there?" she asked. I chuckled. "A little. You too." She nodded, then reached for a glass from the shelf. "Sometimes I need a minute to breathe." You'd think I'd be used to it by now. The way she said it, there was weight in her voice. Not sadness exactly, but a trace of something heavier than small talk. She poured herself some water, and before I knew it, she was leaning against the counter opposite me, as if we'd silently agreed this kitchen belonged to just us for a while. We started talking, nothing serious at first. Travel, food, the book sitting on the counter that she was halfway through. She teased me when I admitted I'd never read the author before, shaking her head in mock disbelief. But then, without warning, the conversation shifted. She told me about how busy life had become, how she sometimes felt like she was carrying everyone else's weight, but didn't have the right to complain. "I'm the one they look at when things fall apart," she said, her voice softer now. But some nights, I just wish someone would ask if I'm okay. The words hung there. I didn't know what to say at first. She wasn't talking to me like I was just some younger guy she barely knew. She was talking to me like I mattered, like she trusted me enough to let me see the part of her she usually kept hidden. So I listened, really listened. And when she laughed at herself, brushing it off, saying she was probably being dramatic, her hand brushed against my sleeve. She didn't move it right away. She just let it rest there, light but steady, as if testing whether I'd pull back. I didn't. Her touch wasn't bold. It wasn't intentional, maybe, but I felt it all the same. Felt the warmth seeping into me. Felt how long she kept it there before she finally drew her hand away. Something passed between us in that moment. Something unspoken, but undeniable. And as she smiled faintly, changing the subject back to something light, I realized I wasn't just someone she talked to out of convenience tonight. Somehow I'd become her confidant. And that changed everything. The days that followed should have felt ordinary. Family gatherings, errands, the little things that keep people moving in and out of each other's lives. But after that night in the kitchen, something had shifted between us. Subtle, almost invisible, but I felt it. And I think she did too. It was there in the way our conversations lingered just a little longer than necessary. In the pauses, where silence didn't feel empty but heavy, almost waiting for one of us to acknowledge it. One afternoon, we ended up walking back from the store together. The bags were light, the air was cool, and the sky had that muted shade that comes right before evening. Nothing remarkable, yet somehow everything about it stayed with me. We walked side by side, and every few steps, our shoulders brushed. The first time, I thought nothing of it. By the third time, I felt the warmth of it stay with me even after we'd moved apart. At one point, she laughed at something I said. A real laugh, not polite or restrained. Her hand came up to touch my arm, a reflex, but she didn't pull away right away. It was the kind of gesture most people wouldn't notice. But for me, it was all I could notice. I caught myself watching her profile as she walked. The way her eyes softened when she smiled. The way the breeze tugged at her hair. She wasn't trying to be captivating. She just was. And the thought unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. She must have sensed it too, because after a pause, she looked at me with a teasing smile. You know, you remind me of how I used to feel when I was your age. I blinked, caught off guard. Is that a good thing? Her smile lingered, but her eyes turned thoughtful. It's nostalgic. A little dangerous, maybe. Back then, I felt like the whole world was waiting for me. Every moment was electric, full of possibility. You carry some of that energy with you. It's contagious. She said it lightly, but her words sank deep. I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled, though my chest felt tight. For the rest of the walk, something hung between us. Not said aloud, not even acknowledged directly, but there. A weight in the air that made every glance, every small touch, feel amplified. When we reached the house, she paused before stepping inside. She looked at me for just a moment too long, her eyes searching mine like she wanted to say something else. But then she shook her head with a soft laugh, almost as if scolding herself, and disappeared inside. I stood there for a few seconds longer, gripping the handles of the grocery bags, my pulse unsteady. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just harmless conversation anymore. Something was building between us. Something we couldn't name. Not yet. It was late. The kind of late when the house had finally quieted. When laughter and footsteps had given way to silence. Most people had gone to bed, but neither of us had. She offered me a ride home that night. The rain had just started, soft at first, then steadier, tracing patterns against the windshield as we drove through the quiet streets. The world outside felt muted, wrapped in water and shadows, and inside the car it was just the two of us. For a while, we filled the silence with small things, half-hearted jokes, talk about music on the radio. But then her voice softened, and something shifted. You know, she said, keeping her eyes on the road. There are nights I wonder how different things would be if I'd made other choices, if I'd been braver, if I hadn't let certain chances slip away. Her words caught me off guard. I turned to look at her, But she wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was fixed ahead, her hands steady on the wheel, though I noticed the faint tremor in her voice. "What kind of chances?" I asked gently. She gave a quiet laugh, the kind people use to cover something deeper. "Love. Happiness." I told myself once that timing is everything, but maybe that was just an excuse. Maybe I was too afraid of what people would think. Her words hung in the air, mixing with the steady rhythm of the rain. I wanted to say something, something that would comfort her, something that would let her know she wasn't alone. But all I could do was sit there, listening, my heart aching at the thought of her carrying these regrets alone. "You don't seem afraid now," I said finally, my voice low. That made her glance at me, just for a second. And in that second, I saw it. Something raw, something unguarded in her eyes. We stopped at a red light, and the car filled with silence so heavy it felt like it could break. My hand rested near the gearshift, and somehow, hers brushed against it as she adjusted her arm. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. The world seemed to narrow down to that point of contact. Our hands almost touching, the warmth of her skin close enough to feel. She opened her mouth, as if to say something, then stopped. Her eyes flicked to mine again, searching, hesitant. For a moment, I thought she was going to confess something. Something that would change everything between us. But then the light turned green, and she exhaled, almost like she'd been holding her breath. She gripped the wheel again, her expression shifting back into composure. Whatever she'd been about to say, she swallowed it. Left it there in the silence between us. Still, I felt it. Felt the weight of all the words that went unspoken. And deep down, I knew we were standing at the edge of something neither of us could ignore much longer. The house had gone quiet again that night. Rooms dark, doors shut. The kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath. I had been on my way to leave, keys in hand, jacket slung over my arm, when I felt it. Her presence. She stepped into the hallway just as I reached the door. The dim light from a lamp nearby brushed over her features, softening the edges, making her look younger and older all at once. Her hair was loose now, falling gently over her shoulders, and she had that look. The kind that told me she hadn't meant to find me here, but couldn't help it either. "Leaving already?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost cautious. I nodded, though my throat felt dry. "Yeah, I figured everyone's asleep." For a moment, she just stood there, studying me. There was something in her eyes, something caught between hesitation and longing. And then, before I could take another step, her hand reached out. Her fingers wrapped gently around my wrist. Not forceful, not desperate, just enough to stop me. I froze. She was so close now that I could hear the faint hitch in her breath, feel the warmth of her touch against my skin. My heart pounded, loud enough that I was sure she could hear it too. "Don't," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady enough to cut through the silence. Her gaze locked onto mine, unflinching, vulnerable. "Don't let go." The world seemed to collapse into that moment. Her words weren't just about my wrist. They weren't about leaving the house. They were about something deeper, something she'd been holding back for too long. I didn't speak, couldn't. Instead, I shifted the keys in my hand, letting them fall into my pocket, and turned fully toward her. Slowly, carefully, I brought my free hand to cover hers where she held me. I didn't pull away. I didn't move. Her shoulders relaxed, though her eyes glistened as if she'd just revealed more than she meant to. She took a step closer, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, warm, subtle, comforting. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was alive, humming with everything we hadn't dared to say. She exhaled softly, her forehead dipping just slightly toward mine, like she was weighing whether to close the distance. But she didn't. She just stayed there, trembling in her stillness, her hand clutching mine like it was the only anchor she had left. And I stayed. I didn't let go. Because in that moment, it didn't matter what was right or wrong, what people would say, or how impossible it all seemed. All that mattered was the truth that had finally broken through her walls. The truth she'd given me in a whisper. And I knew with absolute certainty I couldn't walk away. Time didn't move after her whisper. It stretched, suspended, as if the world itself was waiting to see what I would do. Her hand was still on my wrist, fragile but firm, her eyes shimmering with something I had never seen so openly before. Fear and longing tangled together. I didn't answer with words. Couldn't. Instead, I shifted closer, slow enough to give her every chance to pull away. She didn't, and so I wrapped my arms around her. It wasn't the kind of embrace people give out of politeness, not the kind you forget the moment it's over. This was different. My arms folded around her carefully, reverently, as though she might break if I held too tight. But the truth was, she was the one holding me together. She let out a sound I'll never forget. Not quite a sob, not quite a sigh, but something in between. A release. She leaned into me fully, her forehead resting against my chest, and I felt the steady rhythm of her breathing trying to catch up with the pounding of my heart. I closed my eyes, breathing her in. The faint warmth of her perfume, the softness of her hair brushing against my chin, the way her body fit against mine as though this was where it was meant to be. Every detail imprinted itself on me. I didn't speak. She didn't either. Words would have ruined it. What we felt didn't need language. It was all there in the silence, in the press of her cheek against me, in the way her hands finally let go of my wrist only to circle lightly around my back, holding me in return. The hallway around us faded. The house could have burned down and I wouldn't have noticed. There was only the two of us, locked in a moment that felt fragile and eternal all at once. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, fast at first, then slowing as if my arms had given her permission to breathe again. She shifted slightly, her face tilting so her temple rested against me, and for the first time all night, she looked calm. I wanted to tell her that she didn't have to carry everything alone, that I would be there no matter how complicated it was. But I held the words back, because she didn't need promises just then. She needed presence. She needed to know I wasn't letting go. And so I stayed. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. The only thing that mattered was the weight of her against me, the quiet certainty that we had crossed a line we could never uncross. When she finally pulled back just slightly, her hands still resting on me, she looked up. Our eyes met, and though she didn't say anything, I could read it in her gaze. Gratitude, relief, and something deeper neither of us dared to name. The truth was already there, spoken without a single word. Morning light has a way of making everything feel real. The night before can feel like a dream, but sunlight demands honesty. I woke early, though I hadn't really slept. My mind was still turning over every second of the night. The whisper, the embrace, the way her heartbeat had slowed against mine as if, for the first time in years, she felt safe. When I walked into the kitchen, she was already there. The curtains were drawn halfway, letting golden streaks fall across the counter. She stood by the sink, cradling a mug of coffee in both hands, her hair a little messy, her posture softer than I'd ever seen it. For a moment I just watched her, and maybe she knew I was there, because she didn't turn immediately. She let me look, let me see her not as the polished, confident woman she showed the world, but as someone stripped of her armor. When she finally faced me, her eyes carried the weight of everything we hadn't said aloud. Yet her smile, it was gentle. A thank you without words. "Did you sleep?" she asked quietly. "Not really," I admitted. "Me neither." There was no awkwardness, just truth. I stepped closer and she didn't move away. She set her mug down and reached for the counter, like she needed something to ground herself. Her fingers trembled slightly, and before I could think twice, I reached out and covered her hand with mine. Her breath caught just for a second. But then she laced her fingers through mine, deliberately, firmly, as though this was the answer to every question hanging in the air. I looked at her, searching her face, and what I saw wasn't fear. It wasn't regret. It was resolve. "You stayed," she said softly. I nodded. "I told you. I wouldn't let go." She exhaled, closing her eyes briefly before opening them again. And in that look, I felt everything. Her gratitude, her hesitation, her hope. She leaned in slightly, close enough that her cheek brushed mine as she pressed the faintest kiss against my face. Just a whisper of contact, but it left me trembling more than any words could have. We stood there, hands intertwined, the morning sun spilling across us like a quiet blessing. Maybe the world wouldn't understand. Maybe there would be questions, raised eyebrows, opinions that didn't belong to us. But none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was the truth we had found in each other. The bond that had grown in silence, in whispers, in the spaces no one else had noticed. As I looked at her, I knew this wasn't the end of something forbidden. It was the beginning of something fragile but real. Something we would have to guard piece by piece, step by step. And I knew, deep in my bones, I wasn't letting go. Not of her. Not ever. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more slow burn age gap romances, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Every story is better when it's felt together.